Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good evening to everyone in South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa, and across the world. We're beaming to you from Cape Town here in beautiful Cape Town. Actually, it's probably the most beautiful city in the world, and we hope you're going to enjoy today's webinar that is organized by the Academia Library in Cape Town. This I'm Shabuddin Romani. Al Ikhlas Academia Library in Cape Town welcomes you. We know that we've made contact with people in Washington to Jakarta in Indonesia. There are people from Kuwait too watching and listening possibly also. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, and to all our brothers and sisters in West and East Africa. We also welcome viewers on our YouTube channel, Facebook links, and also viewers on ITV. This webinar is part of a series of talks, discussions, debates organized by the library, Academia Library, Al Ikhlas Library here in Cape Town, as part of a campaign to educate, to empower. Today's discussion is in South Africa is particularly relevant. Just as an introduction, perhaps it's important to say the following. Nelson Mandela is known to have said the following: education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And then he also said, the power of education extends beyond the development of skills we need for economic success. It can contribute, believe it or not, to nation building and reconciliation. So, this is the short background to the topic for today's webinar. It is the pivotal point around which attitudes and actions need to be changed. A critical look at our own educational outcomes, shockingly, has sent us on a trajectory that really we didn't wish we were on. Since the dawn of democracy, we've spent about 4 trillion rands on educating our children. 4 trillion rands. Globally, we spend the most of all developing nations on education. About 18.5% of our annual budget goes to education. The Program for International Student Assessment, which is shortened for PISA, as PISA, PISA, does not have a result for South African children for its 2018 rankings in the list of the top 100 countries. In other words, we fall off the list that's normally organized by PISA. The Program for International Student Assessment, we don't feature at all. Then there's the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, also known as TIMSS, TIMSS, is an assessment of the mathematics and science knowledge of grades 5 and grades 9 learners across the world. We don't feature there either, which is really, really troubling. Our children, in fact, still attend school hungry. They still sit and paint drums under trees and on windowsills in their classrooms, sometimes in classrooms that do not have either ceilings and also do not have roofs in many cases. We are building schools for 100 million rands that should have cost perhaps about 20 million rands. That's really, really a rip-off. Pass requirements have been reduced to a bare minimum that now produces matriculants who are certified, but believe it or not, functionally illiterate for modern economies. That's the background. So today's participants, today's speakers are one, Professor Jonathan Jansen. Professor Jansen is a distinguished professor of education at the Stellenbosch University, and also he is the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He is a curriculum theorist, and his research is concerned with the politics of knowledge. His 2019-2020 books, co-authored and co-edited, include South African Schooling, The Enigma of Inequality, Fault Lines, A Primer on Race, Science and Society, Who Gets In and Why, The Politics of Admission in South Africa's Elite Schools, and then lastly, Learning Under Lockdown, Voices of South Africa's Children and Learning Lessons. His current research includes a national study on the impact of the pandemic on the academic work of women scholars in particular. He holds a PhD at Stanford and 5 honorary degrees that in education. That is Professor Jonathan Jansen. Then thankfully, we've got Mugwena Maluleke. Mugwena Maluleke has been the General Secretary of SADTU. We know what SADTU stands for, South African Democratic Teachers Union, since 2009 to date. That's over is that 10, 11 years period. Other roles and positions he has held in various organizations and constituencies include as being the vice president position for Education International for Africa region since 2015 to date. And then he's also the deputy chairperson of Global Education Campaign since 2018 to date, representing EI as a constituency. Member of the Central Executive Committee of COSATU, which is brilliant. Member of the Commonwealth Teachers Group Steering Committee until 2016. He, amongst others, has educational qualifications. He holds 2 master's degrees in labor law. He's got an LLM there and a master's in business administration, an MBA, and is currently enrolled for a DBA program, which is doctorate in business administration. And we welcome Maluleke also. Mohammed Khalid Sayed is the third participant today. He serves currently as a member of the Western Cape Provincial Legislature and is the Deputy Chief Whip of the Official Opposition, ANC, and Shadow Education MEC, serving on the Standing Committee on Education. He also serves on the Petitions and Rules Committee. Current outgoing provincial chairman of the ANC Youth League in the Western Cape, former student activist of the South African Students' Congress at UCT. He worked in national government as parliamentary liaison officer in the Public Enterprises Ministry, worked as a researcher for the ANC Western Cape Caucus in the Western Cape Legislature, worked as a public affairs officer in ethical consulting, worked as National Research Foundation researcher at UCT in UCT's Department of Historical Studies, and did part-time lecturing in religious studies at UCT. He holds a master's degree in religious studies from UCT with thesis on the historical development of madrasa education in South Africa. And then lastly, he holds a diploma in Arabic studies from the University of Damascus. Today's program is very short, 1.5 hours short, and hopefully we'll finish by 9:30. Just by way of housekeeping, we would have today's introduction, and that's we've just been done. We will have an introductory kind of comments being made by various speakers, participants, and then that will last about 25 minutes. Then we'll have an open discussion for about 45 minutes, Q&A, which you as the viewer, listener, can send via our various platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and if you're watching this live on ITV, you can still access our YouTube channel and pose any questions if you have any. That'll take about 30 minutes, and then we'll close off with closing remarks from all the participants. That is the program for today. So our topic, therefore, is Crossroads or Crisis. South African education, Crossroads or Crisis. Let's agree to disagree. Can we have maybe Maluleke, while we're waiting for Professor Jansen to come on board? Mugwena, let's have a chat. Do you agree that we're either at the crossroads, or do you know that there's a crisis in our education system? Talk to me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan, as well as Professor Johnson, the fellow panelist, and Khalid. It's an opportunity for me indeed to really acknowledge the privilege that we have this evening to discuss this very important task. Of course, let's agree to disagree. Okay, so yes, there is a crisis, and I just want to approach this particular debate on the fact that I am optimistic. And every crisis, as far as I'm concerned, as I grew up, was a crisis that was requiring a decisive moment. And I have always been using this particular principle of saying, in a crisis, leaders emerge. So the education is in a crisis because it has been an economic crisis that induced an education crisis, but also we have now a pandemic crisis, which is a health crisis, which also has now created an education crisis. So on the topic is very critical and so forth. So we can say we are at a crossroad because yes, we have got to be decisive. We need to take action, and in order to address what we see as a problem. First and foremost is that one, And as we discuss this particular thing, you have correctly conceptualized this thing and correctly framed it. One, it is that, can we as a nation change our attitude towards education? Can we? Can we be able to say how best we can articulate education as a critical developmental resource that we have in our country? If we look at our economy, that has not been growing. If it was growing, it was creating inequalities. And those inequalities were illuminated. There was a light shown on it by this particular pandemic. And therefore, we need to go back and say, is our education system really going to be able to drive an economy that is going to be growing? I still have a concern around that. And I believe that in itself is a crossroad that we have got to all of us collectively and say, can we change our attitude, our mindset about education? Can we still see in our country, when we need a house, when we need a tarred road, where people would use education as a bargaining chip? Is it not a crisis? It's a crisis as far as I'm concerned, because no nation in the world that wishes to develop, wishes to have an economy that is inclusive, that is able to address the inequalities of the past and create a stable nation, would go and attack education, would go and identify education as that soft target in order to achieve short-term things that they want, instead of saying, let's make sure that even if we're in a war situation, civil war, or any world war, education has always been protected because it's a safety haven for our children, for our teachers, and so forth. Because we know when we end this particular civil war, or we end the world war, we are going to need competencies, we're going to need skills, we're going to need all the necessary tools that we can have. And education is a player in that particular institution. So yes, I can talk about a lot of inequalities that were caused by colonialism and apartheid, and we're still having to deal with that. And to me, this particular pandemic has been able to produce an opportunity for me in particular. Today, I was talking to the teachers. We have seen leadership in the teachers. They were creative, they were innovative, they were able to come up and say, in a crisis, we shall always make sure that the doors of learning shall be open and shall remain open. We will have to sacrifice our lives in order to ensure that no learner is left behind. However, there are problems that we had to deal with. One of the problems is that the teachers are burning out because they are working on a Saturday. As I was addressing them, today is a Saturday. So they are burning out and they are having emotional stress, they're having mental health problems. And however, they continue to do more with less that they have because of the legacy of apartheid and legacy of colonialism. And yes, you were right to say we are not ranking in where we're supposed to be ranking, despite the fact that we spend a lot of money. But yes, Shode, where are we spending our money? Are we spending our money in the teachers, in the classroom? No, we're spending our money in bureaucratization. We are spending our money on political administration. Do we need 9 provincial ministers of education when we have got 60 million people? Do we need so many director generals, almost 12 director generals in a country of 60 million? And therefore, so many director generals and chief directors I can talk. Let me give you an example with Northern Cape. Northern Cape was number 1 in terms of outcomes, in terms of metric, in terms of bachelors and everything else, when they had a DTG who was called a head of department. But the moment they created more posts for themselves, they are now almost close to the Eastern Cape in terms of the numbers. They're declining every year. What does it mean? It means we took money away from the classroom, we took money away from the parents and put the money in administration, in political administration. So let me allow other people to talk, but yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mogwena. You're making some very, very strong statements, but we'll come back to some of what you said early on. We're fortunate in that we've got Professor Jansen back again. Welcome, Professor Jansen.
Thank you.
Professor, the opening question I asked was, in terms of South Africa's education, are we at the crossroads in your opinion, or is there a serious crisis? Your take?
I don't know what the difference is, Shabadin. Look, we're certainly in a very deep crisis, but the question is a crisis for whom? There's about 20% of our schools that do very well, thank you, who are extremely, we're here in Cape Town, And every time I drive along the main road from the City Bowl, can you hear me? Hello? I just need confirmation that you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, sorry. So every time I drive from the City Bowl all along the main road to Fishhook, you will see some of the wealthiest schools on the continent in a very concentrated area. Think of Rondebosch, think of Claremont, think of Newlands, and so on and so forth. And then within less than 10 Ks, you can see some of the most disadvantaged schools in our country. So if you're asking me about the schools along the main road, I would say we have the best schools in the world. It's schools dominated by white South Africans' children, and increasingly, but in limited numbers, by the black middle classes, our children, the four of us on this program. For those schools, it's not a crisis. Those kids go to UCT and Stellenbosch and Wits. They go overseas. They study medicine and architecture. They do well. Okay, there's no crisis there. But we are not here to talk about those schools, as far as I'm concerned. We have to talk about the 80% of the other schools where there was no continuous learning, from face-to-face to online with the pandemic. And I can tell you now, whatever tricks the Minister of Basic Education and a team got up to with matric results, which is a complete joke, by the way, I can tell you right now that we are going to have a pandemic deficit that will show up in the results for years to come, because you can't interrupt the education of the poor for 3.5 months. And then the stupidity of the South African system of thinking you can make it up, catch up, that kind of pedagogy is completely ludicrous. And then somehow you can catch up between the children of the privileged and the children of the poor. So for those 80% of the schools, Shabadin, it is an extremely serious crisis. I work in schools every single day. I can tell you this. Monday morning when I hit one of these schools, my heart breaks again and again. So we are in a crisis. And I just want to say to my colleague who just spoke, he's quite right, of course, that half of this problem has to do with colonialism and apartheid. But I'll be damned if we sat on our hands for 27 years since democracy. And I can tell you now, in addition to this historical legacy, we also have a legacy of complete corruption, complete incompetence in the present government, and so on. We have to be able to see both sides of this picture. And I am not going to sit here and tell you that it is only one historical problem. It is a problem of people that, how difficult is it? Let me just ask you this. How difficult is it to replace 2,000 pit latrines in the Eastern Cape? My God, this is easy to do. But if you try to do it through our system of governance, through tenders, through I've been personally involved in trying to do some of these pit latrine conversions, by the way, in KwaZulu-Natal. Do you know how difficult it is to break through all these corrupt people waiting in line like vultures? So don't tell me this is colonialism and apartheid alone. It is also our inability to fix our own problems since 1994.
Strong words from Professor Jansen, and I think the point that he makes very eloquently is the fact that we keep on referring to apartheid only as the kind of issue that faced us for as many years, but in reality, and as I said in my introduction, we've spent 4 trillion rands on education, and the fact in very simple ways. I mean, Professor Jansen talks about pit latrines and children falling into pit latrines and dying there at schools is a shocker of the highest order. But let's go to Khalid Sayed. Khalid, you are the shadow education, shall I call you, minister on the ANC panel. In your opinion, Crossroads or crisis? Where are we?
Thank you very much, firstly, for the opportunity, and let me thank the previous speakers. I want to echo their sentiments as well. Look, I want to say that we. I want to say that we're in a situation where we experience both a crisis and we're also at a crossroads. So as Professor Jansen says, and I want to agree with him, for a minority of schools in the leafy suburbs, I'm also in the Western Cape, I do oversight in the Western Cape at our schools. They are doing very well. They are operating under almost perfect conditions. And even with those particular schools, I want to also speak to them as well, because you even have situations where learners who can afford to go to those schools, Black learners who can afford to go to those schools because of some of the discriminatory admissions policies that many of these schools have, and which the departments in provinces fails to actually have oversight over. Even learners whose parents can afford to send them to those schools are even denied to go to those schools. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, the vast majority of our schools in our communities, we've got basically classes that are, classes that are well overcrowded. We spoke about the poor sanitation issues right now in the Western Cape. And I've just now written to the Human Rights Commission as well as to the Public Service Commission on the matter. There's a total of 5,741 unplaced learners in the Western Cape alone. And I'm sure that's probably similar to numbers in the rest of the provinces in the country, regardless of who governs. I mean, we are in oversight. We've got to hold those who are in the executive accountable. And you'll find many of the reasons for learners not being placed. Yes, we find that there's long periods of time taken to build new schools where communities were promised, long periods of time to build new classrooms. But at the same time, even when you find that there are places in certain schools, you find that at the level of management, when you find parents applying to send their children to schools, particularly in our poor and working class communities, you find that at district offices, they are not responsive. These are the cases that I practically get on a daily basis. So we most certainly in a deep crisis. Also, the manner in which education is approached. It's very much approached, it seems, as if, look, it's a tick box exercise. A kid at a certain age must go to school so they can say they've been to school, and teachers are treated as babysitters in a sense, or they are sent to school purely for the purpose of being tools in capitalist production after school. There's not a holistic ethos that's being driven for schooling. So we're most certainly in a deep crisis. Learner transport, I don't even want to start with the fact that the long kilometers that learners in rural areas need to walk to go to school, despite various pleas, they get killed on the way. So there's all of these negativities, and it's very much class and race based. And it cannot only be attributed to the legacy of apartheid. Legacy of apartheid is most certainly there, colonialism, but most certainly the manner in which funding given to education departments is managed. And I want to echo the sentiments made by the General Secretary of SATU. Lots of money that's meant for classrooms, for paying teachers, for ensuring that we've got more schools. Lots of that money is used in the management of education, but in a wrong way. So, for example, in the Western Cape, you would have, for example, a school evaluation authority where money is put there. Instead of strengthening schools, instead of maybe strengthening district officers and circuit managers to do their job better. So there's lots of duplication to create more jobs for government officials. So we're really sitting with a crisis. But I would also say that we're at the crossroads where there's an opportunity for us to shift focus in a more positive manner. COVID-19 has provided that opportunity, because what COVID-19 has done, many discussions such as these, Mr. Romani, were not happening before COVID-19, because COVID-19 has actually stripped naked the deep-seated inequalities that we've got in our education system. It has exposed what we are doing wrong. It has also exposed what we, as public representatives, paid public representatives, are failing to do in terms of our oversight. So it has actually pushed us to be much more rigorous in terms of our oversight. It has pushed us to have much more discussions of this nature so that we can see how do we improve the situation.
Thank you, Khalid. Those are the opening remarks. Maybe just quickly, and then this is a very, very important topic, and I'm wanting to use the opportunity to really find the kind of kernel around which education revolves, and if there's a kind of solution that we can propose towards the end of this today's program. So from SADTU's point of view, Mogwena, I note, for example, when I check the website, you don't have a vision mission statement. I was concerned that you since 1992, you've had 8 publications. And that's an average one publication of around 3.6 years. What role should or can SADTU play in addressing the issues that all of us have raised today?
Let me thank you, as well as thanking again our panelists here, our high prof, a long time. Prof used to be working with us, by the way, when we're dealing with the outcome-based education in 1998. Look, we do have what we call Vision 2030. You may not have seen it in the website. I may not know why it is not possible. It's not there. But we have clarified in terms of 5 pillars in that particular vision of ourselves, to then say one of those particular pillars to me is very important, is creating a learning nation. And then the basis of that creating of a learning nation, Sheldon, is that all these problems that we are talking about here, we were first and foremost saying that we need to change the mindset of the teacher. We need to acknowledge that the teachers were trained differently, where others were trained 4 years and the others were trained for 2 years, and therefore having to integrate our teachers into the system of education that was divided or that was fragmented. We needed to say, what is it that we can do as an organization, SADTU, as an organization itself, in terms of dealing with this particular crisis that we find ourselves in? One, then
Mogwena, I think what you're saying is all correct things, but I'm just concerned that as an organization that's a representative of South African teachers, what in reality have you done on the ground? You know, I mean, this debate is an ongoing debate. Our teachers are, and I don't know if you've ever had access to Professor Nick Taylor's 2008 review of education. It was commissioned by the presidency at the time, President Thabo Mbeki. And that was 2008. That's over 10 years ago. And the issues that he raised in 2008 are not the same today. They have gone worse. I mean, we've got in Limpopo, for example, teachers who are flunking mathematics tests, grade 6 teachers flunking grade 4 mathematics tests. So as an organization, surely by now, there should have been more progress in terms of, you know, what teachers are capable of doing. And if there's a need for development of teachers, where are we at that? Please tell me.
Yeah, no, as I was saying, I will be very brief around that particular issue because in terms of role playing and then the role that we are supposed to be playing, I want to agree with you that the closure of our teacher colleges has had an impact on how we needed to change and be able to empower teachers to be able to do what they're supposed to be doing. When we were introducing the outcome-based education, which is resource intensive. And therefore, the assumption that have been made that we're supposed to be changing, we were anti-outcome-based education from the onset because we were saying it is an assumption that is based on the fact that the schools are equal, that the teachers have been trained the same way, and therefore they will access the same resources, and that is not going to be the case. Then we put those particular things in the Labor Relations Council where we were negotiating. But what is stopping us from improving from where we were to where we are today is what Prof has said. It is the corruption that is there. You have got the worst bureaucratization of our system that you can ever think about in the world. It is, you cannot have a situation where when you are supposed to be building a school, which is a school that will really be restoring the dignity of a working class child, and then you take so many years because people are fighting who's going to get the tender. And that is what we are fighting against. And that is what we are not law enforcement agencies to be able as such to deal with. We can raise these issues. We can campaign about these particular issues, but we can't because there is a moral decay in our country where politicians and those who are in power are really not thinking about the people. You know, they use the word the people. You know, when I began this particular debate, I said, we need to change our mindset. And therefore, as an organization, that is what we're driving. We have to run a campaign that is called I Am a School Fan, where we are pleading with everybody to say, can we see education as a game changer? Can we see education as an enabler? Let's protect it. Let's protect what we have and build forward. So it is not like we've not done anything. The issue is that you can negotiate, but if you are going to be told there is no money to employ librarians, there is no money to employ the OTs, there's no money to employ the speech therapists when many, almost a third of our children are not able to see properly and they need to be assisted. So you're putting those children in a situation where basically you are failing them because your system is one size fits all. So we deal with those particular issues. But the problem is you are a union, and a union is going to always have to deal with issues of rights and issues of representation more than if we were not a union, would be able to build libraries, we will be able to build labs for our children and so that they can learn. So we can advocate because that is the job of a union, is to advocate, is to lobby, is to campaign and making sure that our teachers are given the resources. But if the resources are stolen by political administration, where money is spent there and is stolen by corruption, where you are told that there is a school that is built in the middle of the ocean, and that school has got 4,000 learners, and it has got teachers, and that school can't be deregistered. It takes 15 years to deregister a school that is not existing. And it takes 20 years for us to still be talking about the schools need education support.
Absolutely, Warring Mogoena. Thank you very much. Professor Jansen, education should have been an enabler. Are we at the bottom of the pit and is a good chance that we can do a turnaround? What would you suggest?
Man, I think the first thing we need to do is to be honest with each other. Okay. Now, I am enormously privileged and honored to be part of this panel with Mogoena as Secretary General. He's right, we did work together. And with Khalid Syed. And so I'm going to call out my two colleagues here and say that for us to get solutions, we need to recognize our respective roles in the crisis, including myself as a professor of education, responsible for at least informal terms for pre-service teacher education and the like. But the first thing that to get a solution, we've got to be honest, okay? So Mogoena, I think you're going to agree with me. SADTU was not always against outcomes-based education. In fact, a lot of the pressure that I got and a lot of the insults and a lot of the attacks from the days of Tami, Seleko and others in my office in Durban.
I certainly remember them.
Yeah, was because they couldn't understand that I was not towing the party line. Now, I'm not a party animal. Okay, I thrive on independence from political parties, even though I support progressive politics, obviously. But SADTU was a major champion for political reasons, which, by the way, I understood initially. Okay, it was much later when I think SADTU took a critical role, etc. The second thing is corruption is everywhere in our school system. And Mogoena, with the greatest respect to you, sir, I mean, let's talk about SADTU's role in corruption. What has happened, where you have control, you're quite right. You're not responsible for fixing pit latrines and all of that stuff, and teacher appointments. But surely you can tell us, what has SATU done to implement the recommendations of the Volmink report, which was about jobs for cash, empirically established among SATU membership, especially in KwaZulu-Natal? Do you know what I'm saying? It's taking responsibility for that. I have to, as a professor, take responsibility. Have we prepared our pre-service and in-service teachers for a democratic education system? I'll take responsibility for that. Maybe we didn't do that well enough. But we're not going to solve everything here. If Khalid, as an ANC man, is going to blame the DA, if you as a SATU person is going to blame the government, if I as a university person is going to, so I think we need to we just need to say to each other, to solve this problem, we're going to be damn honest with each other tonight, that all of us have clay feet in the crisis that exists.
Khalid, you are part of the. It's obviously that you're going to have to toe the kind of party line, and one understands perhaps why as a functionary within a particular party that you would do so. But your complaints about the kind of malaise that faces education in South Africa in particular lies at the feet of the party that you represent. What is it that should be done? I mean, professors now keeps on harping on the fact that one needs to be very blatantly honest about where we find ourselves. And that has been absent. The fact that we have had issues with education is not something new. The fact that pit latrines have been around is not anything new. What has your government done thus far to remedy that situation, one? And two, what has happened to the fact that the teachers themselves need, particularly in the rural areas, and perhaps even the kind of peri-urban or peri-suburban areas, they need support, they need training, they need development. That hasn't happened. Western Cape is perhaps an issue, and I understand as a party person that you've got an issue with the DA and how they are running the education department. But nationally speaking, your party supports 8 of the provinces. What do you say?
No, thank you very much. And I think following on from the points raised by the Prof, the first step for the party, and I don't want to defend, firstly, I think the first step, particularly for people such as ourselves who are public representatives and not necessarily party employees, we are deployed by the party but paid by the taxpayer. Okay, the system in South Africa, in the electoral system, is that we are on party lists. That's unavoidable. But I think it's important that the first step is to admit that we've dropped the ball as the African National Congress as well, where we govern.
I think that's the honesty Professor's talking about.
Yes, and I think that's more of us. So, and I try to do that at least here, is that when we are critical of the WCD in the Western Cape, it's not turned into a party political issue. Yes, we are exercising political oversight, but at the same time, the issues that we raise here should also be raised by colleagues, even though colleagues may be even part of the ANC, but who are in the legislature, who are not MECs. They should be raising those issues. We should be admitting that there's a problem and that the problem goes across party political lines, that the ANC in terms of policy and direction, the principles of free quality education and all of that, that's a good thing, and we are guided by that. But when we are guided by that, it must also mean that we've got to be honest about where we have gone wrong. And not being afraid, because sometimes you do get the pressure in that raising issues here in the Western Cape, you are then told at times, no, if you raise these issues too much, the DA are going to raise the same issues about your colleagues up there. Now, that should not be an issue, because actually that should actually prompt further oversight where the ANC governs as well. So I think the first step is to be brutally honest and to say that we have dropped the ball. Yes, there has been. I mean, we cannot deny that there have been strides made. The fact that we've got access to education, the fact that we've got no-fee schools in place, the fact that there's something happening. We cannot take all that away. But I think we need to come to a realization that at the level of management of education, we need to improve. There needs to be fundamental change, but there also needs to be consequence management. Those officials who are corrupt, those officials who are being inefficient in terms of ensuring that our learners have access to quality education, those officials need to be dealt with, despite the political parties that have deployed them to those particular positions. And I think we have to start as the ANC, as the governing party, as a party with a progressive outlook, because that's the progressive thing to do, and not to merely defend a party line because a deployee of a party is failing in terms of education.
Thank you, Khalid. Here's a question from one of the viewers, Mugwena. What has SADTU's main wins been over the years other than negotiating salaries? Mugwena?
Thanks, Shadin. I was waiting to be shown unmute. It's a new language that we have learned today. You are muted, you must unmute.
You can now speak, sir.
All right, thank you so much. Look, because the role of an organization is about representation and advocacy, as I have indicated, apart from the issue of negotiating on behalf of our teachers, we have been advocating for the issues of the classrooms to be reduced. And to the extent that we have got what we can say a universal class size is one of those particular issues that we fought. It's not the best of the best, but at least we had to look at what UNESCO is approving in terms of the class size, and we continue to be doing that because we are concerned about a classroom where teachers still have got 50, 80 learners in the classroom. Of course, in that particular area, we've got to still continue to be doing that. The second
what is the quantum, Mugwena?
The legal classroom size, which is called the class size, is 1:40 in a primary school and 1:35 in a secondary school, and that is what basically you can say UNESCO would say is a universal class size and so forth. So it's not the best of the best when you're dealing.
And what is our ratio compared to what the UNESCO suggests?
At the moment, the ratio is different because in the Eastern Cape you'll have 1:32. Okay. However, because of the infrastructure that is there, you still have to reduce that particular ratio as it is. In Limpopo, whilst the ratio generally will be lower, but in certain schools, you still have got in grade 9, grade 10, 115 learners in a classroom because of the infrastructure problem that the professor said we need to address as a matter of urgency. So it's one of those particular areas that we did. The other area, it was to say, let's ensure that there is teacher development. Okay, we agreed to an 80-hour per annum for teachers to be developed. As far as we're concerned, as that it's not even enough. We still have got to ensure that we develop our teachers to be, be able to understand the learner of today, who is not the same as myself or anyone in this particular debate to deal with that particular issue. So we need to improve on that particular area around that. So the issue of this stubborn infrastructure is what we have not been able to achieve at the end of the day. But in terms of the selling of the post, Prof, we can say to you that the law enforcement agencies were given the names of the people that were pointed fingers by Prof. Volming. And unfortunately, it is not always been said that SADTU was the only union that has made submission to the extent that we also said so and so somewhere is selling the post, and therefore those people are being protected by whatever the system is. But I'm not going to defend ourselves. We take responsibility as the organization and want to agree with you. For us to move forward, SADTU has got to do more as the most representative union to change the mindset of our people and professionalize. We have appointed the same Professor Volme to work on what we call professionalization of the teachers. He has been able to give us a very good document that we are using for that, so that we are able to run training for our teachers to professionalize, because we believe that Teaching is about caring, and we must take responsibility to build this particular nation, all of us. So it's not only that side focusing on negotiation for the teachers. We have moved towards the professionalization, which is teacher development. Someone else can say, but it's not your role to play because you are a union. But we have said we are not a union where we are dealing with computers. We are a union dealing with human beings. And because it is about our assignment of developing human beings, we have got to be concerned about who is teaching our children. We have signed a resolution solely as SADU in the Labor Relations Council, where we are dealing with sexual harassment that is done by the teachers, to say it can't go on. We've got to ensure that those people are being dealt with, decisively, so that we can clean the profession. So it's taking responsibility to ensure that we not only focus on the salaries, not focus only on the leaves of the teachers, but focus on what the profession is all about.
But Mugwena, I mean, we're living in a country, let's be honest, we're in a country where an ex-president has been given the right to choose what punishment he must get for contempt of court. I mean, how are you going to make the changes on the ground if at that very high level, when a judge of the Supreme Court, suggests that somebody who's been charged with contempt of court should actually decide on his own punishment? I mean, it's the kind of incongruency that we have at this point in time. Professor, I was just going to go to you, if you don't mind. The closure of teacher training colleges by, I think it was Professor Kada Asmal at the time. What impact, if any, do you think that has had in the quality of our educators?
Nothing really. I think one of the big lies is that the closure of the colleges of education led to a decline in the quality of education. It's not true. There was a major report done at the time by a former colleague of mine called Cicely Salmon on the colleges. A lot of the colleges of education, don't forget, were in the former Bantustans, okay? They were basically set up as cooling off places, as the economists put it, for young black youth until something dramatic happened in the economy to absorb them. They were horrible, horrible places for primary school teaching. Now, that's in general true. There were, however, colleges of education that were excellent in producing primary school teachers. Because let me be blunt, as a university man, universities are hopeless at preparing primary school teachers. We're better at preparing high school teachers. But we can't do primary school teaching. We don't know how to do that. And so Normal College Pretoria, which I was responsible for absorbing into Tikkies, the University of Pretoria, was an excellent one, but for white teachers, BOC, the Belleville Teachers Training College, was excellent. But mainly for color teachers. Guyani College of Education, in Limpopo was outstanding, largely because of the partnership with Wits University's JCE, the Johannesburg College of Education. But those were isolated. UWIT, you remember UWIT? UWIT was amazing at preparing primary school teachers. My point is, when people say we lost the colleges, they mean those good colleges, but they don't remember the ones in Gazankulu, the ones in Ulundi, the ones in southern KZN, which were hopeless. I was there. I worked with those young people. So I don't think the issue is there. But what I would suggest is we haven't solved the problem of how to prepare primary school teachers at a very high level. And that's a problem. So let me just say this, Shabrin, this is a very important point. Our problem isn't money. In fact, let me just say this to Khalid and to
Mugwena.
You can close all of these circuit offices and district offices, including in the Western Cape. It will make no difference to the quality of education. You can take that whole bureaucracy down. Because by and large, until COVID, those colleagues were really administrative messengers between the Provincial Department of Education and the local school. I don't know what these people do. Fortunately, during COVID, a lot of those colleagues played a massive role in supporting teachers, and that's what we need to keep. So instead of just dropping off post office letters, they start to play a role in the development of teachers. Our big problem is not teacher training per se. You can pour, as we have, by the way, billions of rands into teacher development. It doesn't change a thing on the ground until we figure out how to translate resources into results. This is what economists call efficiency, okay? How do you take the resources and change the results? But you can't do that if another lie, another dishonesty continues in our school system. And it's the dishonesty when the Minister of Basic Education, and this goes long before Angie Mochecha, everybody did this, Carter did this, everybody did this, is they get up there and lie to your face that because of a singular metric, the metric results, the school system is getting better. Forgive my language, that's bullshit, okay? The problem with that they don't tell you is that by the time you get to grade 10, okay, most of the kids that started in grade 2, we've got good data on this, have already dropped out of the system. And by the time you get to grade 12, a small percentage of the kids, okay, right matric, a smaller percentage pass. A smaller percentage pass with a bachelor's university entrance pass. And guess what? In the past year, the number of kids doing mathematics, not mathematical literacy, which is really math for dummies, I'm sorry, okay? Doing serious mathematics, which opens up all sorts of things, has actually dropped. So who the hell are we talking about when we celebrate the matric results?
And that is the big lie, not so.
That's the big lie. So we're talking about Westerford here. We're talking about St. Cyprian's. We're talking about St. John's in Johannesburg. We're talking about Michael House. But we're not talking about the majority of our children, which are poorly served by this system. Now, let me just say this before I get into this. And I want to say the SATU of today, Mugwena, is thankfully, I don't know if you guys remember 5-10 years ago. I mean, SATU used to shut down the schools at random, left, right, and center. It caused havoc in the system. SATU's leadership today, I think, is a lot more accountable, a lot more responsible, a lot more effective, and so on. So, and we need to say this. If it wasn't for the teachers in our system, and I don't care whether they're SATU teachers or Naptosa teachers or Dutch, I don't care who they are. The truth is, they held the system together during the COVID years. We would have been in a lot of trouble. Teachers worked night and day, as Mugwena was saying, okay, to keep the system going. But moving forward, we can't just keep the system going. We need to improve the system. And at the heart of that problem is trying to find out how we can, and we can help with this, by the way, translate resources into results. That is our major problem.
Professor, if I may stay with you, who, in your opinion, should be the big policeman who can manage that process? I'm worried that if we're leaving these resources to either Bladen Zimande or Angie Mochecha, that we're going to have the same conversation in a year's time and 2 years' time and not have the results that we should be having. I mean, if you compare South Africa's results, of South African children's results, with those of the rest of the continent in Africa, in terms of both the TIMS exercise and also the PISA exercise, we really are at the bottom of the rung. I mean, maths lit, as you say, is really seriously dumbing down of education. And the world requires young people to have new skills. And those skills, you cannot get work with, a standard grade geography pass. And that's the problem. So we've got certified young people, matric certified young people, who are completely illiterate in terms of the modern requirements of global development. What's missing? How do we change this?
Okay, let me just say this first of all, and this is a really important point. Every other year, I teach for a couple of weeks at one of the most fancy schools in the world in Palo Alto, California. This is, where Steve Jobs sent his daughter and where the Stanford professors, my old university, send their kids, okay? It's an unbelievable school. And then I come back and I teach and help out at schools like Oscar Mpeta in Nyanga or Zwelathemba, where I'm working now in Worcester. Do you know something, Shabadi? The children in Palo Alto, California, and the children in Zwelathemba, Worcester are exactly the same. They have the same energy, the same potential, the same smarts, okay? The big difference is the opportunity to learn. That's it. It's got nothing to do whether you're black or poor or what's it. It's got everything to do with the structure of the opportunity to learn. If we get that right, we change this country. Okay? Now, one of our big problems here is that teachers have been for so long lied to, deflated, that they have accepted the situation as it is. And to solve that problem, I suggest we need a NETLAC for education. You bring your stakeholders together, okay? Your provincial department, your SATUs, your other unions, your equal education, you bring people together and you say, we're going to draft a plan. We're going to now be honest, and honest means, we have a crisis. I just want one Minister of Education to say this one day. We have a problem, Houston, okay? And we're going to have a 5-year plan to turn around schools in the 9 provinces, focusing perhaps on math and science in the following provinces. Just something like that. That already is 50% of the battle won, instead of trying to confuse and lie to people, okay? The second thing is you bring in the best teacher trainers. The best. I'm not talking about government people running these stupid, after school classes. And you say we are going to create in each of the provinces a program that systematically trains teachers. Even if, people used to laugh at me in the days of OBE, as Mugwena will recall, when I said, if you want to do this thing right, close the schools for a year and do decent teacher training across the board.
I remember that well.
I wish they did that, by the way. I wish they did that.
I agree with you. I was a principal at the time, so I know that.
Oh, okay. My point wasn't to close for a year, of course, as you know, Shabadin. My point was to say, take it seriously.
Yes.
Take teacher training seriously. Yeah. And I can tell you now, we can turn this country around. But I know most of your listenerships is from the Muslim faith, which I greatly respect, as you know. But in the Christian faith, I'm sure there's something in the Holy Quran as well. It says, that your child is not doing well until everybody's child is doing well. And if we had that value system, my God, just imagine what kind of country we are.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. Here's a question for Khalid. Has the government ever explored a virtual school setup? This question is from somebody, Khalid Safuddin in the UAE. This could solve the challenge of failed government funding. Khalid?
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, Khalid Safuddin met with me virtually at the beginning of the year to actually discuss this matter. So I want to thank him for actually bringing it to the public domain. You see, the challenges, and I mean, we're trying to actually get one of the ideas that Mr. Safuddin put forward, trying to get it to the table of WCD so they can look at it. But the challenge that you face, it lies with infrastructure, internet infrastructure, for example. That's a major thing. And that speaks to the socio-economic challenges that we've got in our country. So it is something that is most certainly being explored, but in terms of its implementation and in terms of it being able to be accessible to addressing the challenges that Professor Jansen speaks about and that we're all speaking about at our schools in poor and working class communities, it's going to be very difficult, because even if you say you've got Wi-Fi at the schools, do learners actually have even access to decent internet connection when they get home? Then we can argue and say, no, let's supply them with airtime. Because there are these to say, no, let's make sure that you have a deal with Vodacom, with MTN, with some of these cell phone companies. That can work, and they've been approached. But even with that, the infrastructure at home also needs to be in place. So it could be implemented, but you'll require a whole society approach for that, and it will require the improvement of social infrastructure outside of the school environment for that to be properly implemented.
Quite. Here's an interesting question from Aiden Inal. what concrete steps should be taken? And I think this kind of ties in nicely with Prof's suggestion that perhaps a NEDLAC for education should be organized. What concrete steps should be taken to build trust, to create an impetus for that change, so that people start understanding that the NEDLAC kind of a meeting of minds almost, where people understand that we've got this crisis on hand, but the trust aspect, there's a huge deficit there. And largely around political issues, and largely around corruption, because that's the animal in the room. How would we build that trust? Anyone? Ugwena?
Thanks, Sharon, for that. I believe that, as I agree with Prof around the issue of bringing people together, all stakeholders, all their opinions are important. I believe that, of course, we need to confront the issue of moral decay in our country, which is causing this particular corruption. But building trust, it is to be honest, is to say to ourselves, look, we have a problem, like Prof was saying, in the hands. And the first, for me, has always been, do we as the South African people believe in the power of education? Like Nelson Mandela said, that the education is a powerful tool that if we use it, we can change the world. Do we believe in it? And for me, it is that which we need to be able to be putting education first when we talk. And in that way, we can begin to say, yes, there are policies that have been created, but those particular policies are not being implemented on the basis that, if we were to be honest, is because of incompetencies, it's because of wrong people that have been employed in to deal with those, and we can be able to identify that. But if we were to say, agreeing with Prof and say, in 5 years' time, we have done our research that what we need is an excellent program which is intensive for mathematics and science, and say, how do we invest in developing those particular teachers? Because then we need to go back and be able to say to the people, we have listened to you, we have heard you, and here is a practical step that we are taking. One, we are going to invest in this particular research institution for mathematics and science, to say, how do we change how we teach mathematics and the language? And this is what we're going to do. How many universities we're going to be able to contract for them to be able to take those teachers that are now in teaching and be able to take them, and then we are then able to substitute those teachers and so forth, and we deal. So for me, it is the results that will then begin to build this particular trust. But we cannot continue to be pretending that we have a leadership in the country that is not honest, the leadership that is not taking people together, including myself. We've got to take that responsibility and say, we need to build the trust. And we can do that by by participating, all of us, in a program that we agree to, all of us, to say, this is the program, we are going to support this program, all of us. But we can't do everything everywhere. We've got to be very specific, focused, and we put our energies together. In that way, we can produce the trust that we need. But we can't protect corruption. We can't be defending corruption, and we think that we can restore the trust of the people in the education system.
The big, sorry, you want to comment, Prof?
Yeah, I just want to talk, your question is a really important one, Shabdin, and that has to do with building trust, because this is, a lot of people are so pissed off, to be honest with you, with government of any stripe, whether it's DA or ANC or whatever. They just don't believe us anymore. Now, one way I believe you can rebuild trust is to look for quick gains. Now, as I said, there's about 2,500 per latrine. So it sounds like a really simple thing, right? If government said within 12 months, and by the way, we did this in KZN for a company on whose board I sit, we just said, we're not going to work with schools unless we fix all the pit latrines, and we did that overnight, by the way. But you have to take out the corruption. You've got to take out the vultures. You've got to sort of say, this is more important, okay? For us to fix that 2,500 pit latrines, and we're going to do it within a year, and we'll show you that we've done it within a year. And if that means we get private sector people, and if that means we get it to be led, and I couldn't care less whether the person is white, black, or green, but by the most competent people, the South Africans would see, oh my word, We have solved a problem that has dogged us since 1994 and indeed before that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Build trust by doing things that are simple. Teacher training is a lot more complex than people think, but we can at least make sure. I mean, I can't tell you, let me just get this off my heart. I can't tell you, I like schools that look good. I don't have any problem with that, even if I never studied in those kind of schools. But you know, if I drive past Saks and I drive past this place, and I say, my God, my heart breaks because 10 minutes later I'm in a different world. So people don't want every school to look like Saks, by the way, but they at least want a decent infrastructure. And by the way, post-COVID, and yeah, Khalid, if there's one thing you can do, and Gwena, is push government to lay the basic infrastructure for connection, for connectivity in all our schools. I know it's a huge amount of money, but if you don't do that, there's going to be, I don't know if you guys have been listening to the epidemiologists, there's going to be more pandemics. We're going to lock down again. It might not be COVID, it might be something else. And then once again, that distance that you said has been amplified, or at least we can see it now more clearly, between the poor and the privileged, is going to grow bigger. So instead of just catching up, which is our ideology in South Africa, we play catch up with everything. How about we invest majorly, State of the Union address, in the basic, and tell the president to stop talking nonsense about robotics and so on. Just give every school decent technological infrastructure, fix those pit latrines, and people will begin to trust us.
Prof, you make an important point there, because recently a school was built for 100 million rands, Prof. Now, in my calculations, if you're building a school for about 1,000 children at a time, you're going to need X number of classrooms of X size. That is something like 20,000 rands a square meter that you're building a basic classroom that has 2 windows. That's probably about 60 square meters big, and 1 door. Now that converts into 1 classroom at around 2 million rands per classroom, Professor. And that's where the money is going. It's been stolen by those who obviously benefit the most. Now, the other important question I think that somebody's asked was, shouldn't we, understanding that nations are built on the backs of educators, shouldn't we start also looking at a plan to incentivize people who are brilliant at maths and science and all the other good subjects to adopt teaching as their preferred profession by offering them incentives that's kruk for niks? Why is that not being done? Anybody? Khalid? Can we unmute?
Okay.
Mugwena, you want to go?
I thought Khalid would start, but I can go. No, look, I agree that we have got to do that. We've got to change how we are, recruiting the students for teaching. We need to intensify the program for teaching to such an extent that not any other person, but the best of the best must be able to be attracted there and be given the best training.
How would you do that, given the issues that we've raised today? I mean, corruption is so deep-rooted, Mugwena.
Well, I'm agreeing that we need to deal with corruption, but if we cannot do certain things and then wait until we've done away with corruption, the problem is that what if we are not able to do away with corruption? The issue for me is that we can change certain things now, certain things that can be changed. One is that we need to ensure that those that we recruit into teaching are the best students who have been able to do well in mathematics. That's very critical, and science and languages. And therefore, the universities, I don't teach in the universities, but Prof knows, is that we need to make it so tight that we don't just accept any other person just because that person was not able to be admitted in mathematics and then takes teaching as by the way. You need to take a person who has commitment, a person who will then be able to bring change and a difference in the life of the children. That is mindset, and therefore we can do that. It's very easy to do that by recruiting the best, incentivize them. They come into the teaching. We've got to make sure that they go to the schools that need the most, because those particular schools that we have now are the schools that we need these teachers more, so that we're able to deal with the issue of opening the economy, opening the opportunities for our learners, and then we then agree how we are able to drive these particular teachers, the rural school, township school, that really needs them, because those able schools, they are able to hire the best. They are able to ensure that they identify the best and be able to do that. So for me, it's not something that is rocket science. We can do it. It is possible to do that. We cannot continue to be complaining.
Khalid, in the short term, is it an opportunity to perhaps bring on board good maths and science teachers from Cuba, from Zimbabwe, from India, some of the other countries where maths and science education in particular is taken very, very seriously? Is that not like a really short-term solution, just to kind of give the required impetus that we need to get to where we want to be?
Thank you very much. And my apologies for earlier. I had a problem with my signal. I agree. I think as a short-term measure, but we need to be very, very careful as to how we do it. It must not be done in such a way that it deflates the enthusiasm of the young people who want to become teachers and teach in the fields of mathematics and science. In fact, it should be done in a way where there can be a sense of mentorship as well, and transfer of skills and transfer. So I think that needs to happen. But also linking it to your first question that you posed, which is tied to this, we also need to make sure that the teaching profession becomes an attractive profession. And I think it's not, whilst government most certainly has to take responsibility, but I think also society, we have a large role, and especially sometimes ourselves, even as public representatives, stakeholders, leaders in society, thought leaders, we need to make sure that broader society, our communities, sees sees teaching as a pristine profession that it was seen many years ago. That young people, when they're at school, when they go to university, they'll say, I want to become a teacher. And I want to teach maths and science, for example, and I want to teach in a poor and working class school. So yes, the state must obviously incentivize that. I agree with you on the proposal of the short term. It's a low-hanging fruit to bring in some of these teachers from outside. But I think we need to create an ethos where teaching becomes attractive, where the learner that does well actually goes into teaching.
It's interesting to note that in South Korea, for example, the day teachers graduate is virtually a national holiday. That's the respect that they give to educators and obviously to the teaching profession. And they are really put on a pedestal because the nation depends on good teachers. And it's not for nothing that the South Korea today is the leader in almost every particular industry that you can think of. Prof, maybe this is one for you. Our tertiary education has just become fancy spaces for many of our young people to spend 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. They draw a bit of a support base, financial support base from the government by way of their fees being covered and so on. But are these institutions really producing what we require, or are they just fancy high-value institutions that promotes only those who teach at these institutions?
No, I don't think that is true, Shabdin. We have some of the best universities in the world, let me remind you of that. Not all of them are as good as the others, that's also true. But, our architects, our urban planners, our physicians, our doctors, our pharmacists are taken into graduate school and to employment all over the world, as you know. And that means we're doing something really, really good. And so on. I also, when I talk to business people, they often tell me, but your graduates aren't oven ready. the British like to call it oven ready. What nonsense is that? None of us were oven ready when we got our first degrees. I became a teacher with a BSc degree, but what I learned about teaching was the first 2 years on the job. You don't become an expert surgeon when you leave your MBCHB and your specialization. You have to first do a couple of hundred transplants or whatever the case might be. So the basic fundamental knowledge and skills that young people require, I think South African universities, certainly the top 10 among them, do a reasonably good job of preparing young people for society and for the economy in particular. What we don't always have is the partnerships that you have with accountants going in for articles, or law students, LLB students going in for, and medical students serving an extra year, and all of that. That we can do better at in making the transition. But I think our universities give us value for money.
Here's another interesting one. Mother tongue instruction should be critically evaluated. Probably all of the ANC main guys have kids in English medium schools. This comes from Firial Samuddin Mohammed. Would like to feel this one.
If I could, because I heard the ANC being mentioned just very quickly. Not that I want to get on the defensive.
Go for it.
No, but I think that's a very valid point. Mother tongue education, but I think at the same time also there needs to be an emphasis on the English language as well. I mean, clearly we cannot. We need to be result driven when it comes to the studying of English at our schools also, because it just opens up learners when they need to go study further. But I fully agree about the big wigs sending kids to English medium schools. Well, if English is their language, but I mean, here in the province, I know of many leaders and public representatives of the ANC whose children are at schools in rural areas where the medium of instruction is not English. It's actually Afrikaans. So yeah, I just wanted to put that. Thank you.
Prof, here's an interesting one. Please comment on the role of religion in the future of curriculum. This is from Brian Lenders.
Let me say two things. It depends on what you mean by religion. I do not believe that public schools should be places in which we peddle any particular faith. I have seen too much damage done, especially in Christian schools, where you have the Muslim or Hindu or other kids having to stand outside in assembly. That is absolute rubbish. So as a Christian, I don't believe schools must be a place where you peddle religion, not public schools. Private schools is a totally different matter. The second thing is, I do think it's good for kids to learn about world religions and to learn it at the hands of teachers who are really skilled, not in drawing out contrasts and conflicts, those exist, but also to show what is common. For example, in all our faiths, somebody told me the other day, I really like this, in all our faiths, there is this notion of welcoming the stranger. It's at odds with xenophobia. It's at odds with xenophobia. You welcome the stranger. And if we can teach those values as opposed to a particular religion, then I think we're on good grounds in public schools.
Right, here's an interesting one. A child learns maths in isiXhosa in grades 1 to 3, then have to learn new maths concepts in English from grades 4 onwards, and I'm sure it applies to Zulu also. This doesn't make sense. Maybe Mugwena, you want to take this one?
Well, I shall first is to agree with Khalid that mother tongue is very, very important. You know, when UNESCO took a resolution and advised countries to say that it's important that a learner or a child be given an opportunity to learn in mother tongue. Those countries that took that opportunity have really advanced in science and mathematics. So you can go to Thailand, they took that seriously. Cambodia, they took that very seriously. So as far as I'm concerned, we can teach learners in their own language, and they can learn mathematics, they can learn science, and so forth. So because, for example, if a French president comes to South Africa, why is he speaking French? Why not English? Because he has studied English, but he doesn't. When a president of China comes to South Africa, they have got to be translation. He doesn't speak English, but he speaks Chinese and so forth. So we've got to take our cultures, we've got to take our contacts and our languages very seriously so that we can be able to teach that. Because whilst we do this thing of teaching them 1 grade, 2 grade, and therefore we bring English, and they have not developed the language adequately in terms of the proficiency level that they need to develop. And hence, they are going to have this particular deficit in terms of the competencies and the requirement of that mathematics and the language.
All right, I think we've now, it's 10 to 9. Maybe you can start with closing remarks. Khalid, maybe we'll start with you. And any other comments that you'd like to make? Khalid, you need
Thank
to
you so
unmute
much. I was just looking for the mute button. I want to just further comment on the question posed to Professor Jansen about religion at school. It's something that I'm also very, very passionate about. Having done postgraduate research on theological institutions in South Africa, but also having been a product also of a Muslim school, both a Muslim public school in the primary school days, as well as a Muslim private school, of which you were the principal during my time, Mr. Rumani. I want to say that it depends on the manner in which religious education is perceived and defined. So I would say that most certainly at the private school level, and we're in a democratic state, so parents have a right, if they want to send their children to learn religious instruction. I think it's important and it's fun, and it does play a role in the holistic upbringing of a child. But when it comes to the public school terrain, I think it's very important that schools, regardless of the religious ethos of the school, should use the religious ethos as a basis to build a spirit of Ubuntu amongst learners, to build a spirit of giving, to build a spirit of nationhood, but also very practical, not just to say, oh no, we're teaching you to be tolerant of everybody, that this is what this religion believes in, this is what the other. No, the religious values, and I believe our religious traditions in South Africa actually share this in common. The religious values which are imparted at our schools need to be put across in such a way that you actually encourage a spirit of social activism amongst our learners, a sense of identity, a sense actually, in fact, of learners looking beyond their own selfish material needs going forward. We need to, so it can play a great part in terms of nation building and in terms of actually improving our society, coming back to the issue of corruption, dealing with issues such as corruption, building trust, because you'll be producing learners who will be most likely public representatives, teachers, officials, professionals, professors, with an ethos, and you can actually utilize religious ethics as a basis for that. So I just wanted to touch on that. But in closing, I think this has been a very, very good discussion. I think from a perspective of a public representative, I want to say, regardless of the parties we represent in the legislature dealing with issues of education, because education is a provincial competency now, and even at the national level, I think we ought to approach education and our oversight of education with an open mind, not be straitjacketed, participate in discussions such as these, be open to ideas. These ideas that are coming, that are emanating, the ideas that will come from an education NEDLAC, for example, should set the tone for how we actually do oversight, how we hold ministers, MECs, and officials accountable. And I think on that basis, we'll be able to move forward. We can use, in fact, the current COVID crisis as a basis for us to actually move forward.
Well, I was going to suggest, given the urgency of the matter, that perhaps academia library, Prof, if you support the initiative, maybe we could be acting as a kind of mediator for various organizations and bodies and people to found this NEDLAC that you're talking about, so that we can make the change that needs to be made, because it's an urgent matter in my view. And I think if we're all going to be sitting on our hands, have these wonderful debates that we're having today, and walk away and say, I was a good speaker on that panel today, then we've achieved absolutely, in your words, Prof, nothing. I wasn't going to use stronger words than that. But the point is that if it means that academia and libraries should be involved and act as a kind of catalyst for this, then I would certainly be prepared to arrange something like that and start that debate and discussion and conversation around that. Maluleke, your closing remarks.
Let me appreciate this opportunity, and thank you so much for allowing us to agree to disagree. That was the first principle you laid. Fully agree with that. Secondly, is that we continue to really support our teachers. They have shown leadership in a crisis. At a crossroad, they have been able to hold the system together, and therefore we need to continue to be improving their situation, improving their environment under which they work, and improve how they are able to deliver the education to our learners. And we need to invest, as the Prof said, in the connectivity in terms of technology, because indeed we need to have blended teaching. Learning must not stop when there's a lockdown. Learners must continue, because we can really avoid a catastrophe of a generational nature. So we can be able to do that. And lastly, really, is to change the formula, Khalid, is to change the formula of how we fund the schools. We can't continue with this equitable formula that basically is not equitable, because it's not going to improve the schools in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and KZN. So the government must really listen to the people so that we can improve the infrastructure in our schools. But I want to thank the teachers, the parents, and everyone else that were able to making sure that our children are in the schools. And let's take responsibility, all of us. So let's dialogue, let's agree. And the religion issue, for me, I want to agree with Prof. Let's maybe talk about other values as far as I'm concerned, because I know religion plays a very important role, but obviously in certain instances, it is also divisive. And I mean, imagine if you have got children queuing outside and then the other children are not being addressed because they are you are dividing them, and you can't divide them. And as far as I'm concerned, they are best values that we can learn from religion, but teach them in a spirituality or teach them in a different way. And we can be able to build our nation. So thanks, Shadin, for this opportunity. It is a decisive moment that we need, because the pandemic has given us that popular opportunity. Let's learn from the teachers, let's learn from everybody who was creative, innovative, and building resilience. So for me, I want to take this crisis and say, let's not go back. Let's not try to go back prior to the crisis. Let's build a momentum where we cannot tolerate pediatrics. We cannot tolerate mud schools. We cannot tolerate leaderless in our country. We need morally accountable leadership, including myself.
Thank you very much, Mugwena. And I take it that we now have SADTU support for our NEDLAC. Professor, your closing remarks.
Yeah, we need SADTU in there, and the provinces as well. Look, early this morning, I went downtown in Stellenbosch to meet with some rich people who are going to fund this, help me fund the school that we started. And it's a school in I mentioned it earlier as well, Latemba and Worcester, where no child takes mathematical literacy, okay? Where every teacher stays after school every single day for teacher development, where I've already taken with the colleagues there in the school turnaround project, the first year matrics this year, taken them. They've never left Worcester. They've now been in universities, in the top universities in the Cape, in engineering departments, in actuarial science departments, so that they can imagine what it's going to be like. I don't think it is difficult to change 26,000 schools. It isn't difficult. We have some of the smartest people, including your panelists, including you, Shabudin, with your enormous experience of education. We can turn this around.
I agree. I agree.
We can turn this around. My faith in ordinary South Africans, to come together and as Mugwena and Khalid have been saying, let's keep the momentum that we built up from the pandemic crisis. When so many of us, people I didn't even know, were feeding children at schools because they didn't have food at home during the lockdown and the school nutrition program was shut. Elsie's River, all these places, Let's keep that momentum going and make sure that the only way you change this is not with government officials, I'm sorry. The only way you change the school system is with the people of South Africa. And in them, I have not lost faith.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Jonathan Jansen giving us his final comments on today's webinar. Thank you very, very much. I think 1.5 hours really is too short for I think a very, very important topic of this nature. But I think that it's really time that all of us put our shoulders to the wheel to try and make the changes that really need to be made. We're actually robbing our future children of the legacy of living a good life, a stable life, a life that will be progressive in a sense, by stealing from them in the way that we do. But if we continue to sit on our hands and do nothing about it, we will be left accountable for our inaction in a sense. So thank you very much to the panelists, Professor Jansen. I really appreciate the fact that you've come on board. Mugwena, it was an eye-opener in terms of what you are doing at SADTU, and I'd like you to take up the challenge to support any initiative that kind of makes the changes that's required. They're very, very urgent, they're very important. And then the young man Khalid Sayed, who in our community certainly is a rising star, and he's an activist of note, and he's been doing fantastic work as a young person for as long as I remember him. So thank you very much, panelists. And then I must thank the academia team, and particularly Dr. Elias Parker, who drives this process of having webinars, besides his involvement on the day-to-day affairs of the library, academia library in Cape Town. He is a powerhouse of note in terms of his passion for what he does and how he does it. And none of this would be possible without his support, his encouragement, and the connections that he makes to make what we do work across the country, if not across the world. He reaches out to many people who support these initiatives that we have at Academia Library. So Dr. Elias Parker, thank you very much. One cannot forget to thank Anwar Abdurrahman, who is the secretary of the committee that serves the library. He does sterling work in the background, does all the technical kind of briefings and so on. Shanaz Ibrahim is the logistics person who would have contacted all the participants today. Mohammed Jaffer of on-screen virtual conferences, whose professional equipment that we use, and we really thank him for the professionalism it is always shown in all our webinars. It really works very, very well. And then his assistants, obviously, Wesley, and today Wasim. Then one mustn't forget ITV for having broadcast us live, and all the other people who've listened from across the world to this particular broadcast today. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.